Hello, friends. Welcome to this session on forming lifelong learner practitioners. My name is Helen Blyer. I serve as the Associate Dean for Lifelong Learning at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I'm also the president of the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry, a related learning organization of the Religious Ed Association. And it is my great delight to introduce and support my colleague Jody Porter, who's going to be offering this presentation today. Jody most recently served at Acadia Divinity College in Nova Scotia as the Director of Education for Ministry Innovations, and she is the incoming Managing Director for Coordination Programs at the Forum for Congregational Life at Duke Divinity School, the rebranded leadership division of this Lilly program. She is an exciting and excited conversation leader, I think, when it comes to different ways of doing education. And I had a sneak peek at her material because it is part of a book that she'll be talking about. And it is a great way for us to think constructively and well about the nature of the education that we're doing. So, Jody, over to you. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you. Grateful that you've joined us after this holiday weekend on a Monday even. So hopefully we will make it worth your while. This session is sponsored by ALM, which is the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry, and will be focused on forming lifelong learner practitioners, theological literacy across the ecology, which I will say more about in a minute. My presentation today comes from my chapter in ALM's forthcoming book, which is called Sustaining Ministry Education, Cultivating the Ecotone of Lifelong Learning. And it's out later this month, even a month early, maybe 2 months early, from Atla Open Press. I currently serve as the board secretary for ALM, and I'm excited to share that we have a new website about to launch where we will include details for accessing the book. And Helen, if we have a way to drop that link in the chat at some point, our board president
I am
is Helen
doing it
Blyer.
right now. In fact, the website is live. So I'm going to
Excellent.
drop the chat.
So thank you, Helen. It's ready to go. She serves as the president of ALM, and we've been working hard on the new website. So we would love for you to check that out and stay tuned later this month for when the full book is out and ready. There are several chapters from all of our colleagues in lifelong learning. So now to speak a little bit about what I'll be sharing specifically from my chapter today. A bit of a spoiler alert. I'm not actually concerned only with the thriving of lifelong learning programs. I'm also concerned with the impact of theological education as a whole, by which I mean what usually qualify as core programs like accredited degrees, as well as continuing education or lifelong learning. So for example, CEUs, certificates, and micro-credentials. I did write this chapter while I was serving most recently at Acadia in Nova Scotia. And there we leveraged a Pathways for Tomorrow's grant from Lilly Endowment to track emerging congregational and cultural trends and to conduct leading edge research in education. Emerging insights from that work guided all of our efforts in teaching and learning at ADC, from our MDiv program to our newest micro-credentials. Today, I'm going to start by sharing an excerpt from the chapter. Then we'll break into some small groups for a little bit of discussion, probably 15 or 20 minutes. And we'll rejoin for the last 15 or 20 minutes together to have some large group debrief and discussion. So I'd love to get started. Again, I'm thrilled that you're here, taking your time to be with us at the REA gathering. And I look forward to our conversation throughout the hour. If you'd like to hover over your name and just list next to it which institution you're representing today, that would be really helpful for us in case we don't get to more fuller introductions as part of our time together. All right. So in our work at ADC, we were reflecting on the nature of theological literacy. What is this thing that we're trying to do with students or with others in our programs? Or trying to cultivate, actually. How do we know when our work is done? And what does our ideal MDiv graduate or program graduate look like? Now, a confession. Even as I was working at a seminary whose primary constituency is a particular denomination, in our case, it's the Canadian Baptists of Atlantic Canada at ADC. And even as we recruited our largest entering class of MDiv students in years, I remain committed to the broader role and possibilities of theological education in the public square. I think that theological education matters because it cultivates the next generation of leaders for our churches, and theological education matters because it shapes how we relate well to each other in our communities. So it's about prophetic witness. It shapes how we embody what Jesus asked all of us to do, be good neighbors. Cultivating beloved community, as Martin Luther King Jr. called us to try, involves what happens not only inside churches and seminaries, but everywhere. Theological education, I think, is at the heart of beloved community. And so I've been wondering, as I wrote this chapter, I was wondering, what is the role of theological educators in this moment, in this cultural moment? What do our churches, schools, and communities of the future need from us right now? Meanwhile, our students arrive with diverse backgrounds and depart to serve in diverse contexts. In our context of Nova Scotia, we must reckon with the histories of Indigenous peoples, Acadians, and African Nova Scotians. Increasingly, we receive migrants from Korea, India, and African countries into our churches and seminary. So we're realizing that we cannot curate a single experience of theological literacy or cultivation of theological literacy for multiple diversities. Instead, in keeping with larger trends in theological higher education, we must imagine how to serve diverse students well. We must imagine a less static and more dynamic approach to theological literacy. This presentation invites us to reflect on the essential nature and function of theological literacy across the ecology of theological education, including the ecotone of lifelong learning. I advocate for a broad definition of theological literacy that connects with the public square and involves not simply static content, but rather a dynamic, wise posture. I contend that cultivation of robust theological literacy requires educators to include more heutagogy, which I will say more about in a minute, more heutagogy in their work compared to pedagogy and andragogy, organizing disciplinary content to help students develop facility with the pastoral cycle. That's one resource anyway. And I conclude with two tools that we have been using at Acadia Divinity College to foster theological literacy in a time when students and the public desperately need theological education to be its best: Indigenous Appreciative Inquiry and generative artificial intelligence. I will also say a bit about learning portfolios related to that. All right, so it seems straightforward to presume that churches, denominations, and theological schools might work together to nurture theological literacy. In distinct yet interrelated ways, these institutions form leaders who continue the conversation that has unfolded since the birth, life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ. Though we interpret that history through unique ecclesial lenses, we have a common goal: to hand on the faith. What seems less straightforward, however, are the possible connections of theological literacy to broader publics and concerns outside church walls. Does such literacy involve simply describing the Christian faith well amongst various value-laden identities in a postmodern world? Or does it also entail a more normative capacity of leveraging the Christian faith as a resource to address the needs of civil societies? I believe that the core of theological education is a theological literacy containing many facets. A theologically literate student should be a competent congregational leader. They should embody theological understanding, spiritual maturity, and interpersonal responsibility amidst other congregational leaders, scholars, and laity. And they should have skills to navigate religiously diverse public spaces in ways that contribute to civic life. They might work toward the latter by helping shape a common language for civil society, which I would call a universalist approach. Or they might do so by representing the best of a particular religious tradition in the public square, which I would call a communitarian approach. Essentially, I presume that cultivating theological literacy entails preparing students from diverse backgrounds to minister, even sometimes prophetically, in various contexts both inside and outside the church. As Willie Jennings has shared with us, it involves shaping spaces of belonging in ecclesial contexts and beyond. From Palmer and LeBlanc, it inspires asset-based approaches to trauma-informed community wellness efforts. And from Elizabeth Conde Frazier, it leverages cabos sueltos, or loose ends, from oft marginalized traditions to transform churches and communities. The challenge is to nurture theological literacy for public arenas in which the most prominent versions of Christianity these days, especially in the United States, often seem not very Christ-like. How do we push back against what feels like a theological illiteracy and raise up wise leaders who can shepherd beloved communities? At the moment, I firmly believe that droves of Christians are getting public theology massively wrong these days. And of course, unreflective support for any single political party cannot count as theological literacy. This is the world for which seminaries in North America must train bold voices for God's good work. Deep familiarity with our Christian biblical and ecclesial traditions, coupled with ways to express that familiarity inside our church families, cannot be the only or even the primary goal for our programs. At ADC, our mission is to equip Christians to serve the mission of God in church and world with transformative impact. So to fulfill that mission faithfully, we were thinking about how to be concerned not simply with the cross-shaped vertical relationship between God and individuals, but also those cross-shaped horizontal relationships among individuals in community. We must support our students not only to disciple followers of Christ within their churches, but also to embody Christ and empower others to embody Christ within their local neighborhoods. This task is the most important one I think that theological educators face today. Again, whether we are teaching core programs or offering traditional continuing education opportunities or facilitating anything in between, it's this task of forming beloved communities. All efforts across theological education must point toward the ongoing growth of leaders for church, academy, and society who are critically reflective and flexible. Theological literacy, in this view, encompasses a lifelong journey of honing skills for theological reflection. It's about becoming a lifelong learner practitioner for the church and the world. Most importantly, it requires not simply accomplishment of key static content, but rather formation into holistic, dynamic, or let me say it this way, but rather a formation that involves a holistic and dynamic posture of phronesis, which is practical wisdom. If ever our idea as theological educators was to graduate sages who know most of what they need to know for lives of ministerial service, of course, that idea will not work now. When we think about the future of work across all industries, there's a report called the WEF 4.0 report that I'm pulling this information from. We are noticing that it's going to require less specific content and more skills with built-in mechanisms for adaptability, including skills in global citizenship and creativity. Churches and schools are welcoming ever more diverse populations, and students are expressing a desire for more flexibility and personalization in education. Students need to be prepared for real-world impact in a rapidly changing world, with evolving job markets and bivocational ministry models. In view of these trends, again, theological literacy cannot be something that is static. That's not what the goal can look like. At the same time, though, it doesn't have to be a moving target. Theological educators must imagine their programs as pieces of ongoing formation for diverse ministerial leaders who can access content easily, but who must nurture those lifelong muscles for utilizing that content well. If we drill down on the capacities that we cultivate, if we aim to form lifelong learner practitioners who are thoughtful and nimble wherever they serve, then our theological education efforts will have a much longer shelf life and an ongoing deeper impact. However, the challenge for any seminary faculty like ours at ADC, mostly comprised of specialists in traditional disciplines like Christian history and biblical interpretation and theology, is to utilize their content expertise not to reproduce content experts, but to shape these adaptive leaders. So, enter my new favorite concept, this idea of heutagogy. Heutagogy connotes the word heuristic, meaning to inquire and learn something for oneself. The most amenable strategies for shaping students who will succeed in the future are those that are student-driven, inclusive, problem-based, collaborative, and lifelong. And they must emphasize learning how to learn. Heutagogy, which as you can see here is self-determined learning, is exactly this type of learning strategy. It emphasizes student agency for diverse students, a non-linear sort of choose-your-own-adventure method connected with real-world environments and challenges, collaboration skills, and self-reflection on learning. Heutagogy shapes students with lifelong capacities to leverage learning in new contexts. Students who become heutagogical learners can reflect and lead change wherever they find themselves. And heutagogical approaches are democratic, not advocating a correct understanding of disciplinary content, but a correct approach to it. As you can see here, Emmeline Reisdorfer has suggested that instead of passively receiving information, heutagogical learners engage in self-directed exploration and problem solving. Complete consciousness occurs when an individual transforms themselves into a lifelong learner by utilizing knowledge as a product for changing who they are and their surrounding society. This approach to learning suggests that no learner is inferior to another, and all learners must not be docile. They need to be active in their learning. Heutagogy meets learners where they are, invites them to bring their own context to the learning, and encourages them to explore their interests toward constructive applications in neighborhoods where they serve. In the case of theological education, heutagogical approaches form students as public theologians. Heutagogical learners develop the facility to connect Christian traditions with public circumstances in faithful, adaptive ways. These students shape lifelong muscles not only to disciple congregations, but also to embody prophetic voices in broader communities. So how does such a learning strategy compare with more well-known approaches, or other gogies, as I like to call them, such as pedagogy and andragogy? Pedagogy is often synonymous with learning for children, but is not limited to that age group, and it can be quite helpful for students with little academic or practical knowledge of a topic, as you can see in the chart there. Pedagogy helps students gain the basic building blocks for later work via courses that emphasize the disciplinary canons, guide students through some logical linear sequence of those canons, contain a significant number of lectures, and assess for acquisition of knowledge. Andragogy, which is often synonymous with adult learning, and heutagogy both invite learners to take more control of their learning. These approaches may work best with students who already have some academic or practical knowledge of a topic. Teachers utilizing andragogy or heutagogy in the classroom provide guidance and resources while allowing students some choice in how they will navigate their learning journeys. But here's the key difference between the two. The difference between andragogy and heutagogy is the extra layer of self-awareness that's nurtured in heutagogical learners. Heutagogical approaches afford the most control to students, inviting them even to co-design learning outcomes, syllabi, activities, and assessments with their teachers. Most importantly, heutagogy involves self-reflection on the process of learning and subsequent utilization of that same process for similar or different results as needed in new contexts. So in andragogy, students are developing competencies or proven abilities in acquiring knowledge and skills. Students can retrieve knowledge and they can repeat skills. But in heutagogy, students are developing capability. They are not only competent in knowledge and skills, but they also can adapt that information for unfamiliar situations. In theological education, heutagogical approaches can emphasize self-reflection by centering either in individual disciplinary courses or through transdisciplinary experiential and capstone courses, the cycle of action and reflection that undergirds pastoral praxis. Students should graduate from a master's level program not only with knowledge of hermeneutics and theology and practical ministry skills, but also with mastery of the tool that organizes all of that knowledge into ongoing iterative cycles of reflective work, the pastoral cycle or spiral. In my view, theological literacy comprises capability with this pastoral cycle. This is the core. In the pastoral cycle, leaders are trying faithful actions, reflecting on them considering context, scripture, and traditions, and then imagining next most faithful actions in a continuously repeating loop of reflective action. The cycle forms the core of prophetic public theology. It brings scripture and traditions into conversation with real-time concerns. It involves an ongoing frenetic or practically wise posture for ministry, one that students nurture through accredited programs and lifelong learning. Siloed disciplinary approaches or newly emerging competency-based approaches leave out sometimes this important organizing core, this capability with the tool of the pastoral cycle. And I think we do so to our peril. Theological literacy that emphasizes this cycle constitutes the seminarian ready to relate well and innovate creatively in a fluid global community. Now, faculty already busy with full loads of teaching, research, and service may find it overwhelming to feel as though they need to revise their work to respond to any number of emerging trends with congregations or in education. Further, even if we encourage faculty simply to focus on heutagogy as a key for nurturing future-ready seminarians, the task may seem out of reach. How might we simplify that task of cultivating theological literacy in our complex times? At ADC, we are imagining how to orient courses, our mentored ministry program, whole degrees, and micro-credentials around a learning portfolio. Of course, it's akin to a portfolio that an artist might design to garner commissions. A ministry portfolio would include any learning artifacts that students want to take with them into their future ministries. Even in the non-practical disciplines, students can generate research findings, create works like art or poetry or digital media, and write reflections that connect the subject to their personal passions and concrete hopes for the world. They can design their own projects to explore theological disciplines in ways that are meaningful to them and develop their lifelong learner practitioner skills. Students can set their learning goals, methods, and assessment criteria in consultation with their instructors. And most importantly, the portfolio includes self-reflections on the processes of creating those artifacts, connecting learning with the pastoral cycle. Through a learning portfolio model, students imagine how to take their studies into future ministries from the moment they begin those studies. The portfolio serves as a resource for recognizing prior learning and informing the denominational ordination process as well, identifying strengths that students already have practiced and strengths they plan to develop further. The focus of student learning and praxis is that thread of theological literacy centered on capability with the pastoral cycle. Students leverage the resources of their own ministry contexts, core programs, and lifelong learning opportunities to continue building their portfolios. They develop that frenetic posture that inspires them to add to their portfolios throughout their journeys, whether through their work, further education, or communities of practice with peers. But how could faculty possibly support every student or even small groups of students to create their own unique journey through theological education through a learning portfolio? Here enter two of my favorite tools, which I call the two AIs. Indigenous Appreciative Inquiry, or IAI, and Generative Artificial Intelligence, or AI. IAI is a process that invites faculty and students to explore topics in partnership with each other. It offers a conversationally focused, asset-based, open-ended way to identify a topic that a class or a small group wants to explore. I've become familiar with it while working at ADC in partnership with NATES, an Indigenous learning community, and share it with you now at the blessing of Terry LeBlanc, the founder of that community. Faculty can begin each term with an IAI conversation that welcomes a class to discern the theme or challenge they want to explore together within the parameters of the course's discipline. Or faculty can collaborate to offer one-off seminars or transdisciplinary courses on topics that students self-identify through IAI. Because IAI is an ancient practice of listening to diverse voices and advancing community concerns positively and collaboratively, it constitutes not only a heutagogical device for classroom purposes, but also a process students can use in their work when they graduate. It is a frenetic framework for global citizenship, innovation, and faithful change. Inviting students to practice IAI both maximizes their educational journeys and prepares them with an essential tool for ministry. The second tool is AI, which ADC utilizes for faculty efficiencies and personalization of student learning. In 2024, we designed a tailored version of ChatGPT trained on ADC's identity and mission, MDiv program objectives, a syllabus template, and frameworks for learning outcomes and grading. Faculty utilize what we call the ADC Course Content Creator to review current syllabi, draft new syllabi, brainstorm class activities, and shape assessments. We have been piloting another version of the tool as well, which we call ADC Futures GPT, that translate our Pathways grant research on current trends into practical classroom implications. Faculty can leverage any of these kinds of tools to tailor courses instantly, even for individual students or small groups. We like to think, humbly, hopefully, that ADC is a leading voice in theological education for determining the possibilities, limits, and ethical implications of AI tools amidst the quickly evolving field of generative AI resources, as well as heutagogical approaches with those tools. We believe that AI tools will not diminish the theological literacy of our students, but rather can support their development of it. Instead of shying away from resources our students soon will know well anyway, we are shaping proactively the kinds of tools that best facilitate theological literacy. AI helps us serve more diverse students well, from diverse contexts headed to diverse ministries, than we could do without AI, because AI helps us lean into individualized, reflective approaches for our growing student body. Ultimately, our students could use tools like these to develop their own personalized lifelong learning journeys. Meanwhile, as with the tool of IAI, facility with AI will serve students well not only in the classroom but also in the congregation. If we help students leverage AI tools through frenetic wisdom, through the lens of the pastoral cycle, then they will help their congregants and neighborhoods do the same. So, in conclusion, just to revisit where we've been, I would suggest that the way to future proof our curriculum, if there is a way, the way to future proof our curricula for core degrees and lifelong learning must involve more intentional focus on theological literacy, interpreted as a capability to function as a prophetic and adaptive leader for changing contexts. In a season when theological schools may not recognize many purported expressions of Christianity, theological educators must shape public theologians with the wherewithal to embody Christ in ways that nurture beloved community. We cannot change our content fast enough to keep pace with emerging trends in educational research, but we can focus our courses on learning portfolios that emphasize the pastoral cycle and develop lifelong learner practitioners. A heutagogical learning strategy that maximizes tools both old and new, such as IAI and AI, can equip students for faithful leadership amidst the cacophony of voices in the public square. The viability and vitality of theological education in all our schools, I think, and beyond those walls, depends on it. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to stop the share. And I think we can pause for a little bit of Q&R and then go into breakouts. How does that sound? In case anybody needs to drop off.
Do you want folks to use the raise hand function so they can bump to the top of your screen?
Absolutely. If you'd like, that would be great. So we'll maybe do that for 2 or 3 minutes till the top of the hour, and then we'll take some time in breakout groups. Constructive criticism is welcome as well. Any comments, questions, challenges, suggestions? Joseph, I see you. Can you unmute yourself, I hope?
I did, but yes.
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. I came in late. ADC is what?
I'm sorry. Most recently, I was working at Acadia Divinity College, and that's in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. It's part of the Canadian Baptist denominational family.
Acadia Divinity?
Yes, I'll put it in the chat for everyone to see there.
Thank you.
Oh, Paul, I see you.
Hello. I was just reflecting on your generative AI component of your presentation, and I saw a lot of parallels there with the subject of constructionism. Constructionism, not constructivism, but constructionism. The I know that in the 1970s, it was projected by constructionists that I believe Kolb in particular, that generative AI would be used to help students embrace constructionism. The idea being that the AI, they projected this a long time ago, like years before AI, generative AI became a thing. They had this idea that students would create with AI in a way that they couldn't create before, in almost like the zone of proximal development. The idea of for example, that they gave at the time was of being able to create comic strips, using AI, which now can be done. And so I'd be curious to know your thoughts on the application of constructionism in relation to this kind of research that you're doing.
I am not as familiar with constructionism as would be helpful to give you a very good answer or a very good thought to that very good question, but I don't know if you have another thought or two yourself that you'd like to share in this space with others who may have a similar question. The best I can say is that when it comes to reflecting more robustly on some of the issues coming up with AI and the capabilities with it, I'm really a fan of what Michael DeLashman out of General Theological Seminary is starting to put together around humanity as compared to artificial intelligence. And so I follow his Substack, and I think he's getting ready to put his book out. I'm not sure how much he's put on the Substack yet. So I'm looking forward to that, waiting for that, because I think that when we talk about AI, we often get stuck on the technology, and the ethics also important. But I'm really interested in, and I think we as educators in kind of the religious and theological spheres have an obligation to think about those larger theological questions connected to it as well.
Well, yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic because, of course, constructionism is very much rooted in experiential learning, and I think that artificial intelligence can allow us to create things and ex create experiences and create art and whatnot that go far beyond our skill levels normally can achieve. So I'm very interested in seeing how this model of yours will pan out.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Mary, I see you next.
Yeah, I'm just, I love the stuff that you're talking about under this. So hear this as a question of curiosity more than anything else. I don't really believe that making these distinctions between pedagogy, andragogy, and heutagogy are going to be very effective right now because some of us have been trying for a long time to help theological educators think about what they're doing in teaching and learning through an adult learning lens, which might be andragogy, or through a project-based lens, which is part of what is living under heutagogy. And so there's a part of me that's wondering why you think you want to use those labels. How are those labels helping you when we have a lot of evidence that a lot of us who've been designing teaching and learning in these more creative, participatory, reflective, justice-oriented ways, the previous labels haven't helped us. So how does this shift help us?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I suspect it depends on the spaces where each of us are serving and working, of course. In our at Acadia Divinity College, as we were trying to sort out our Pathways grant, we hadn't yet had a resource in teaching and learning in our space. And so a significant part of what we were trying to do was help some of our faculty, not for the first time, think about their teaching and learning practice, but to dive in more deeply than we'd been able to do before the grant. And in conversation with the NATES Indigenous learning community was my first exposure to the word heutagogy. I was trying to ask them how and why they do what they do. And a lot of it involves learning in a circle, reflecting back on histories, et cetera, and going forward, but really democratizing the classroom a bit more. So a lot of that's happening in any number of places already, with or without these kinds of goji labels. But in our space, it was helpful to try to name some of those pieces to sort of reflect back and discern what kind of practice we already had and where we might want to try some new things as well. We, as a matter of fact, in our DMin program already are engaging in heutagogy to some extent because you invite your students to choose their topic and shape their approach to it and that sort of thing. But there's in our space also bachelor's and master's level courses where it's interesting to try to think about how can we empower. It feels like in our spaces, our students are still very much trying to check the boxes and make the grade. So at least in our space, we needed to shake that up a little bit, and it gave our faculty some language to do that. Oh, Dean.
Hi, Jody. Thank you. Great drive-by presentation. Talk about an elevator pitch in a hurry. It's one way to think about that. I two quick questions. The first one is the institutionally trained Chat GPT, the Acadia model. Has that been distributed at this point? Is that something that is accessible so that other seminaries thinking in a similar fashion might think about using AI in a way that really is reflective? I know so that's my first question. Is it out there somewhere to be found? And that might be a quick one to answer. Is that yes or no, or is that still behind the firewall somewhere?
So at the moment, I do not believe it is. I concluded my work with Acadia in April, and I know that they are in the process of thinking what is next for their work on this front. And it may include sharing a tool like that more broadly for a very nominal fee. But promise not to tell. I know this is being recorded, but it's also not hard to create that sort of tool for your institution with a partner like ChatGPT. Now we're doing robust versions, and it could be helpful eventually for that to be provided and folks to just access that and not have to think about it. But if you wanted a very basic version, what we thought was most important for us, first of all, was to buy into a version of ChatGPT, for example, that protected our intellectual property. If you these days you may be able just to toggle on a button even on the free versions, but when we were doing it 2 years ago, it was important to actually buy up a level so that we knew that when we put syllabi into the system, for example, it was not absorbing it into the large language model ether and using it for other purposes. So that was step one for us. And then step two, it's really pretty user friendly to upload some information about your institution, for example, or how you approach teaching and learning, and then just invite it to help you play. And sometimes it's a really good thing. We've all done our critically reflective training already. We can tell when it's not saying something helpful. But other times it's a really great brainstorming partner that really produces efficiencies for our faculty when they're revising a syllabus or creating a new one. So it's easy to go out there and play a little bit if you want to try that in the meantime before we have something more readily available.
Okay, I'll make the second one very quick, but knowing this is a lifelong learning presentation, I'm mindful that portfolios often, from an institutional standpoint, when it comes to competency-based, even outcomes-based models, tend to still reflect an institutional desire. In other words, whether it's an accrediting body or a denomination, many of those outcomes are predetermined to show competency in. But what I'm hearing is something where, in light of the double loop, as they call it in Heutagogy, the student is actually setting their own outcomes and their own capabilities. I guess the best way to say that. So that strikes me would be a little more difficult at the formative level of theological education as opposed to lifelong learning, where there would be some kind of set of assumptions around that early formation. Am I making sense with that?
I think so. So I'll try quickly, and if I don't hit it, we can come back to it on the backside of some breakout space. But
Okay.
I think when it comes to thinking about your core degree programs and trying to integrate maybe some more Heutagogy into those, of course, it could just be course level, or it could be kind of a one-off sort of event. It wouldn't necessarily have to be your whole curriculum. But to the extent that you wanted to infuse a little bit more of that, I don't think they will mind me saying, at Kairos, for example, if you're familiar with Kairos University, they also happen to be doing a competency-based theological education model, so CBTE, but it's not only because of that reason that they are really adapting what they do to each individual student. And it's really fascinating between their CBTE approach and their mentoring model, how they are able to make sure that they are meeting the student where they are and helping the student gain what they need to serve in their context. And it's essential even in their space because they're working internationally across any number of student participants. So I think I would say yes, and it's a little more challenging in some of those spaces, if I'm understanding you correctly, when you're thinking about accreditation requirements and denominational requirements, yet at the same time, there are ways, and some places are finding it really fruitful for what their students are needing and wanting. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Harold, let's go. We'll go quickly and then we'll have time for breakouts.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very stimulating. There's so many things you said that I found interesting and helpful. Just one of them was your comments on indigenous appreciative inquiry and learning portfolios gave me some wonderful ideas that I can incorporate into the assignments that I give my students. My question for you is, if you could say a little more about how you engage students' theological beliefs, convictions, presuppositions in the learning process. And I ask that coming from my own context as somebody who's spent over 40 years educating people for positions in ministry. And I'm thinking in particular, like at the end of your even beyond your students, but even how your own theological convictions are brought into the way you teach. You mentioned at the end enabling people to live by their Christian convictions, forming a community of beloved disciples. So I'd just be interested in how you address the core religious educational concern of bringing together theology, religious studies, and the education.
Mm. I have found, well, first of all, let me clarify, in case it's useful, my most recent role at Acadia Divinity College was to support all of the faculty doing that very thing. So I was a step removed from how they might have been sorting out that particular challenge for themselves, engaging each of their students in their own kind of theological commitments. However, I have been in spaces where I have led that kind of work, and of course, I was helping our faculty think about that kind of work. And I really think that this is where you can even you may not call it this, but infusing a bit of Heutagogy into your work, or a bit of a learning portfolio, any sort of activity, even in your classroom, all of you do this, where you're inviting the student to reflect on who they are, where they've come from, and how that matters in connection with the biblical content or the theological content or the historical content. That is the thing that brings it all together. I think certainly in my own experience, I would have liked to have had a little more intentional space to connect where I'd come from theologically with what I was engaging academically. And so I shaped, actually, it was a space of lifelong learning, a campus ministry in my undergraduate institution to help with that. But to the extent we can help that be a core part of what we're doing in core degree programs, in seminaries, et cetera, too, I just think that graduates the sort of young people who in our own denomination, the Canadian Baptist denomination, for example, can show up and answer the unanticipated questions in the ordination sort of committee. They're not just showing up with their content, but they're showing up with that flexibility to be able to say, this is where I've been, this is what I've learned, this is what I think matters now for this context, which will be an important skill as they're out in leadership as well. So that's just a beginning, I think, of response to what you've asked. I don't know if that's scratching any of the right itches, but yeah. Well, let's maybe take 10 minutes to break into groups, Helen, if that's okay. And I am going to drop a couple of questions in the chat for everyone's consideration. This is a bit of a choose your own adventure since we only have 10 minutes. So I want to challenge each of your groups to choose whichever of these questions you're most excited about. One is more focused on theological literacy. One is more focused on Gojis and the pastoral cycle. And then the last one, it's not showing up quite correctly in the chat, is about pieces like IAI and AI as tools. So there's the first two, and there's the third, and hopefully those questions will still show up for you.
I'll
as
message
we get
them
into
anyways. I'll
Okay.
grab and message them.
Super. So just take maybe about 10 minutes to share with each other. It could be related to these questions or whatever sparks stood out for you that are going to be of practical use when you go back to where you serve. And then we'll wrap up at the end, the last 5 minutes, with kind of a check-in. Welcome back. We'll wait just a minute for everybody to pop in. I love it when it counts down and you're still in the room. I like to think that means there's constructive conversations happening. So we only have 5 minutes left. We wanted to give an opportunity for anyone who wants to ask another question, make another comment. Let's do that. We've probably got room for a couple. So I'm especially curious if anything came up in your group you'd like to share here.
I would just invite folks to unmute at this point and speak out since we're a small enough group to be able to see everyone on the screen.
Go for it, Joseph. I see you.
I'm going to say this because I already told Daniel I'm taking it with me beyond, so I'll give him credit, at least in this conversation. He made a great distinction between theological education and theological literacy and vocational literacy. And many times, the seminaries and higher education with religion, they prepare you for theological literacy. But there's generally a lack of vocational literacy.
Thank you, Joseph. Yes. Folks are coming not knowing what they want to do or leaving not knowing what they want to do. Yes. Thank you for that. Other comments?
So, if I may ask, vocational literacy and theological literacy, might there be any difference in both?
Correct me, Joseph, if I'm not saying the right thing, but my take on it would be theological literacy would be becoming a critically reflective, theologically thinking sort of person, whatever your roles might look like, whereas vocational literacy might be, of course, a vocation to a religious sort of role and or the Protestant take of wherever you find yourself serving God in the world. So knowing what you want to do. But Joseph, would you say that differently?
I would, but you've captured the essence of it. So,
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Other comments on theological literacy, how you shape those who come through your programs and or tools you use to do that good work, or anything really that came up in your conversations?
Just to say quickly, I think one of the conversations that we were having was it seemed to some folks in the group easier to do that like in a classroom or in a DMIN project with working with individual students than to shape a faculty to have that thing happen.
Yes, I will share with you. There's some colleagues who came to a related presentation I did about our Pathways project at, I guess it was maybe the last biennial, not the one we just had, the ATS biennial. And they have started shaping kind of a one-off seminar each semester, or at least once a year, that's kind of embodies this heutagogical approach. So students pick the topic and they help shape how they're going to approach it and figure out what comes out the other end. And so there hasn't been space in that institution to shape the curriculum or even an individual course, but they figured out how to do it kind of extracurricularly that's really enhanced their work. So that's an option. Thank you, John.
And when that
320.
happens, how do you evaluate that cohort of students? How, if it is extracurricular, how does it fit into the grades and the scores and the vettings that have to do with the traditional theological content that they are so they must have to show competencies in?
I suppose in their case, it might not be part of what students are doing for a grade, and or it could be the kind of thing that adds into a learning portfolio. That's one approach. If we had time, I would show you how I would play with our version of ChatGPT to come up with some ideas in response to your question, because I'm sure it would have some more. But the learning portfolio could be a good example if you're needing to assess it more formally. Yeah. I see that the time is 3:30. God bless each and every one of you for taking an hour out of your Monday afternoon, 2:30 Eastern time. It's been great to be with you, and I have an extra minute or two I can hang on if that's useful to anyone. But blessings as you go to your next piece. And don't forget, our book is coming out, the Alum book, on our website very soon. We'd love for you to enjoy it. Open access, free. So
And
take good care.
alum.org. Thanks, Jody.
Alum.org. Yep.